Hello everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Delving Deep ESO. Now in this episode we're going to dissect all of the juicy details from the rather recent interview conducted between the excellent ShoddyCast brothers and ESO's own Nick Konkle. Now I'll have a link down below if you want to hear the full interview with voice and all, but I'm going to do my best to pick out all of the best bits for you guys. So let's get into it, shall we? We have tons and tons to go over with this episode. So let's just dive right into the questions and answers, shall we? The first question mentioned by the ShoddyCast to Mr. Nick Konkle was about combat and how it's felt floaty in the previous builds of the game, most notably the different expos and that sort of thing, and even at QuakeCon. Here he gives the answer that combat has really been tweaked to give that sense of impact, which we've heard before, but he also mentions that the killing blow, both for melee and for the spell users and archery users, that we're going to get that sense of, man, I just overpowered my enemy and I just stuck it to him with a killing blow. So he made sure to add that there's going to be a lot more impact in that facet of combat. In addition, he said that in more recent builds, they've added impact not only to when the player attacks and the mob they're hitting, but he also said that impact has been added to the player and the player model and the animations there, so that when you hit somebody, for example, with a big power strike, the mob will, for example, move to like your left side because you're swinging from the right, so they're going to move left with the impact, but the brunt force from it is also going to make your arm and your body twitch and react, right? They've said that they've added this sense of impact to the animations on the actual player side, so it should be a more realistic and natural reaction when you're attacking. So that was pretty cool. I didn't expect them to kind of go that far with it after all this mention of floaty combat, so I'm glad to see that they're taking that part of the combat seriously. Now the next question for Mr. Nick Konkle, if I could freaking talk today, was about bows and how they looked kind of odd at the QuakeCon conference during that little playthrough, which was the first person mode debut. And it really came down to there was some bugs, and it was an early beta build, and the animations were not all ironed out for the first person mode, that they decided to go this route by showing us the first person mode, because they felt that it would really give that sense of we're an Elder Scrolls game also. I've been saying before that they're trying to sell that part of the game a little bit too hard, in my opinion, because the MMO aspects are just as important for this game to survive. But he said that really what's happened here with the conferences and the different things, the same as with the floaty combat, it's just come down to we have an early build and not everything has been quite ironed out properly. But he said that they've already ironed out all of the bugs that we've previously seen with the arrows, specifically how they were disappearing mid-flight or leaving an odd sort of spell trail behind them, which was very odd for me to see, and sometimes maybe not even showing up at all when you attack with the bow. So they've pretty well ironed out the bow quite a bit, alongside the melee as well, he was saying. Now here comes the real big part, I think, of the interview, and that was the mention of the guild stores and the elaboration of what they're actually trying to do, because we've had some interviews with him in it which have kind of given some kind of conflicting information, maybe not conflicting, but more of just vague to the point of might as well be conflicting, and it came down to, will non-members actually be able to use the guild stores? Because that's been something that's kind of been floating around, is will you be able to, will you not be able to, are we gonna have to jump through hoops and rejoin guilds and stuff? And I've talked a lot about my thoughts on the guild store system, and it came down to this, right? You're going to be able to put up a guild store in Cyrodiil, which when you capture and own a keep, you'll be able to use that keep as a way to sell your goods through the guild store system to anyone on your alliance that goes to that keep. So I keep seeing this example of like you would set up a kiosk of sorts kind of thing. They didn't really clarify if that's what you're going to be able to do, but it seems like you're going to go get your keep, right? You're going to have your guild, set up the keep, set up your store, and whatever like tweaks you want to make to it, because it does seem like you can add maybe some public and private, or you can maybe add some rules and tweaks to how the actual market is going to work for your guild specifically. But it comes down to, you're going to have your keep. You can have the public access version of the guild store set up there in Cyrodiil, and anybody that goes to your keep in Cyrodiil can have access to the guild store if you allow permissions for people to do that if they're a non-member. One of the things that was asked of Mr. Nick Konkle was the whole thing with Cyrodiil, is it going to be, this is meant for PvPers? And he was saying no, that it's not, that the guild store system is absolutely not just for PvPers, and it's fully intended to be utilized by everyone in the game on your own alliance. Now, only guilds with keep ownership can actually sell to non-members, so it seems very important to have one, but he was saying that Cyrodiil is not going to be just for PvPers alone because of the guild store system, that they intended to put it here as a way to keep Cyrodiil relevant without it being just PvP, because Cyrodiil is super important to the lore of Elder Scrolls and the guild stores, plus the whole keeps thing with the guilds. It's going to give guilds a sense of pride and ownership of their keeps, so it's going to give a bit of investment to the guilds that are in Cyrodiil, but it's also going to invite non-PvP players to venture into Cyrodiil to play the marketplace, to get their goods and services done by these guilds that have successfully kept a keep. He was also saying as well that we shouldn't worry too much about we shouldn't have a worry about monopolization of sorts, where like one guild is able to just own one keep and there's just not enough keeps going around. He said there's a lot of keeps, so we shouldn't worry right now at least about how the market is going to look. And he also made sure to point out to us that we realize that it's new and it's not very clear what we're going to get, right? He said we realize it's new and not something seen before, and maybe that's why a lot of people aren't quite getting what we're going for here. But he said that they've built this from the ground up with all of their other systems in mind, and once you realize how it's going to play in the scope of their own game, he said it's not going to feel nearly as foreign as we're making it out to be, that we should be well at home with the guild store system. And he said that the guild store system is going to work a lot more similar to how a regular auction house would work. There's the obvious differences, like there's no actual bidding system and it is controlled by the guilds and stuff, but he said that we shouldn't worry too much about how it's actually going to affect the game, that this is just their spin on how to deal with the economy and allow the player base a little bit more control over it outside of the outliers that are sitting up there with the tons of money and controlling the market themselves, and the guilds that do that. So I'm a little bit more sold on the guild system, the guild store system rather, so glad to hear that he gave us some clarification on that. Then came legendary items. He was asked if we should see anything similar to that in Elder Scrolls Online, perhaps as maybe Daedric or Aedric artifact weapons, such as like the Mace of Molag Bal and that sort of thing. And he said that, first off, we shouldn't expect artifacts to only be seen in the Fighters Guild. He wanted to clarify that this is a misconception. I believe Josh, asked him if this is going to be something we see outside of the Fighters Guild, and he said absolutely yes, that this whole misconception about artifacts being a Fighters Guild only thing, I'm not really sure where that came from, but so we should expect to see these legendary style artifacts littered about the world in different quests and talked about in the game world outside of the Fighters Guild, so that's nice to hear. But for the actual question about will the players be able to get their hands on these very rare, almost legendary style items, he said that in the future we should definitely keep our eye out for the very rare items and weapons and armors that could turn out to be Daedric artifacts in some form or another. He didn't really give us more than a teaser, and he got quite a giggle out of the fact that he couldn't tell us what they were planning for the legendary style items. Now next up came some conversation about arenas and dueling systems and all of that sort of stuff, and he took the opportunity, Nick Konkle took the opportunity, I should say, to mention to everyone that even though the little features, like maybe arenas or duel systems and similar style content, even though these little things are wanted by the community, right, we can't just expect them to be added in willy-nilly. That their whole goal with this, right, is to have a very aggressive post-release development cycle, but have patches that have substantial content additions that are going to come to the game, and they're going to be thematic in nature. So for the one that we know a lot about is the justice system. We already know that it's going to come out with the Thieves Guild attached, and they're going to add a lot of content with the justice system, and he said we should expect content to come in big batches with themes like this in the future. But as for the actual dueling system or similar content, he says that they're not on the table right now. Neither dueling or arenas are on the table for development right now, but he assures us that every bit of feedback is looked at over and over again, and perhaps with enough feedback and convincing from the community, those kinds of things could be implemented in the future. As Josh and Kyle themselves said during the interview, challenge accepted, Nick Konkle. Guaranteed your forums will be flooded with chimes from the community as to why you should implement a dueling system. Now, next up came mounts. Will there be anything beyond horses, such as racial mounts and that sort of thing? Can we expect anything beyond just a plain old horse? Well, he said no, we cannot expect the racial mounts like the Khajiit riding their lion thing or anything like that, but there will be multiple variations of horses at launch. We should expect anything beyond... We shouldn't expect anything beyond the horses, though, with the mount progression system currently, at least, aimed at sort of promoting a good horse-human player companionship, where you feed them and you ride them and do whatever else they have planned for that whole progression system. But the whole thing is you will unlock saddles and armors and similar additions to your actual horse. So post-launch, we can expect maybe some different racial mounts and that sort of stuff, but at launch, we're going to get our armored horse add-ons, and through some progression with our actual mount, we can unlock the different things to kind of tweak our little riding companion to our liking. Then came some talks about the bounty system for PvP coming with Elder Scrolls Online at launch. Nick Konkle said there are a number of quests and achievements that point the player towards killing a certain alliance player, or not a particular player, but it aims them to kill players on a certain alliance, rather. There's also achievements and quests for getting revenge kills or doing PvP assists, and very similar. There's a lot more on the table for that kind of thing, but it's not what you would expect from when someone says like a bounty system where I can put out a bounty on someone's head. It's not going to be that, at least at launch. Maybe down the road we'll see something like that in Cyrodiil, but we can expect more of a quest-based or achievement-based bounty system in the works for ESO at launch. Now, the next bit is about the justice system. As I said earlier, it's going to come with the Thieves Guild, and I believe also the Dark Brotherhood. The question to Nick Konkle was, the justice system, when it's coming out, should we expect like a karma or infamy or reputation system coming alongside that when it's released? And he said yes, reputation and the infamy or karma or whatever they're going to call it is something that they've actively been working on internally for whenever the justice system comes to the players. And he said it absolutely is something they want to get right when they release the justice system, because it's part of the sort of test lineage. You have this sense of reputation and how your actions have reactions and how that affects your place in the world. So he said he really wants to get that right. But he also mentioned that through the Thieves Guild quests and skill lines, we can also expect to see mechanics normally synonymous with the stealthy thieving gameplay style, even including pickpocketing into the conversation. Now, this has been mentioned by a couple people that have kind of picked this apart. It's not going to be PvP, guys. I know that's what a lot of people want, but it just doesn't really fit, and I honestly don't see it coming for a long while, if ever, to Elder Scrolls Online. But that does mean that with the justice system, we're going to have the reputation thing, but we're also going to have the pickpocketing thing. So you can maybe go around town and get some extra money on the side by being a pickpocket master, but you'll have to be careful not to get your reputation up. So the systems there could provide something really engaging and cool. So I'm very looking forward to the justice system and what Zenimax is bringing to the table with that, what is supposed to be a pretty substantial addition to the game post-launch. Now, the next bit of conversation was about balancing and how the skill line system and just the overall open-endedness of the way builds are formed. How is this system used in a way that's going to encourage players not to copy and paste the sort of quote-unquote build of the month, or whatever you want to call it? And he kind of goes off on a little tangent right at the beginning here, and he says that during implementation of vampires and werewolves, right, that him and his colleagues were looking at this going, man, these are pretty overpowered right now, right? And they came to realize, though, after playing with the builds and trying to see how best to maybe counter the vampires, they came to realize that people are going to play this game of kind of rock, paper, scissors of sorts, where the example he was giving with the werewolves and vampires is that if, for example, they are just beating the hell out of you in PvP, we should easily see this formation of vampire slayers coming along who could potentially take advantage of the Fighters Guild skill line, which has a lot of bonus damage or bonus effects to undead and to beasts of demon origin or what have you. So this could be used to offset the sort of overpowered nature of a couple skills on the vampire and werewolf side of things. This example, though, he made sure to clarify, is just one sort of scenario that could happen where a really powerful or popular build gets onto the interwebs and everyone is just grabbing it up, and then you see this other side come along that has come along and decided, you know what, we're going to counter these bastards. Let's go in with our own very hardened and tight-knit group of guys, and let's own these vampires and werewolves. Let's make our very focused build to counter their build, and then suddenly you have a shift in sort of the meta game, as it were. And then you'll see somebody then come along and go, these vampire slayers are kicking our butts because maybe we've leaned too hard on utilizing our vampires and werewolves in Cyrodiil. So let's then make a build which takes full advantage of the fact that they can't do bonus damage to such and such builds or what have you. So then you have this sort of, again, rock, paper, scissors. But the big thing that he also mentioned was that even though you can look at it that way, of rock, paper, scissors, you can't also discount the player ability in hand. So he made sure to say that if you play a vampire, for example, and you're fighting somebody that uses Fighters Guild skills, it's not going to be a be-all, end-all where the Fighters Guild guy just mows over the vampire. That's not gonna happen. The skill and the skill line choice and the abilities and just how you built your character on the vampire side of thing will absolutely affect the outcome of an engagement between these two conflicting builds. So we shouldn't fear for a constantly rotating build cycle where one very hard build completely counters another build, and instead it's going to be a lot more flexible. So we could very easily see an ongoing war between vampires and the Fighters Guild, which sounds freaking awesome to me. I am down for some of that. I'm not a big PvP guy, as you guys know, but that sounds pretty awesome. The one thing I did want to add, though, before moving on to the final question, is that I don't like how PvP focused the answer for this was, though. The one thing I'm still worried about in this game, and it's hard to say how it's going to work because I haven't personally played the game to any point where I can say this is going to work out when lots of people are playing it, right? There's no way for me to tell how well builds are going to stick and how hard it is going to be convincing people to deviate from these like build of the month style things. So until then, I'm not really sure how I feel about the skill line system in terms of balance, but I think it's still going to work out pretty well, because even if it doesn't work out where build of the month style thing works out for the PvE side of things, the fact that the PvP is being tweaked in a way like this, that it's going to allow a lot more flexibility, and the whole skill line system being flexible at the baseline, I'm still really excited of what it brings to the table. So even though I don't really like that this is PvP focused in terms of the answer provided by Nick Konkle there, I'll take it. I'll take what I can get, really. Now, finally, the last question, which maybe isn't the most glory glorious of questions to sort of end our little discussion here, and that's the mention of the silver crossbows, or crossbow bolts, from the Fighters Guild, which he was talking about when mentioning the vampires and werewolves in the conflict with the Fighters Guild in the PvP scenarios. And he was asked if this means we could expect some crossbows as an actual weapon type, maybe as the game launches or shortly after. And he was saying currently no, there's not any plans to implement a crossbow, for example. He did say that they are definitely looking to implement more weapons in the future so that we have more skill lines, but he was saying for skills like this, where it's the silver crossbow, right, it's just an ability animation where the character is going to pull out a small crossbow that shoots a single silver bolt, and it's going to do its effect. And he also said that Zenimax has deliberately developed these kind of one-off style abilities, like the silver crossbow bolts, or another one would be the knife throwing, I believe is on the Nightblade skill line. They deliberately made it this way so that they have the skills which would normally be associated with a weapon, right? Instead of giving it to you in the form of a weapon skill line and having just this overbearing amount of skills with every little knife and fork and whatever else you're throwing around or shooting, giving a skill line, he instead was saying they wanted to give it to you in a way that was on your skills, but not just clogging up the skill line system. I actually like this. They don't want the skill line system to be so huge to the point that you see too much copy and paste between the different weapon skill lines. I really like this mentality, because otherwise you're just going to go, well, I have a great sword, no, I have such and such weapon that they add in the future, and all of a sudden you realize, well, they're very similar, or there's not really point to having both in the game. So I'm glad that they've decided to go this route and give us the sort of, it's usually the throwing or the ranged weapons that which aren't really tied to what you're doing usually. It's those kind of one-off abilities, as I mentioned, added as skills you can pick from your different skill lines and utilize as you see fit. But guys, that's going to do it for me, I think. There's a ton to soak in on that for sure. Let me know what you guys think of all these little new tidbits of information, especially the most controversial part of the interview, and that's obviously the guild store system. As I said earlier, learning that Zenimax has built this system from the ground up to really take into account all of the other aspects of the game and all the other systems in the game, and then confirming that the public has potential to get involved with the guild stores and be part of the economy through the guild store system without actually having to join and drop guilds in a very odd manner as some of us expected when they first announced it. It sells me a little bit on the whole guild stores thing. I'm not convinced. I don't think that I am. I'm far from the hate it mentality I was when I first heard about it, but I'm definitely not convinced at this point. We'll just have to see how it all pans out. One of the big things that kind of led me to think this is maybe gonna go okay was just the sheer fact that Nick Konkle seems like a really down-to-earth guy, that it just seems he's giving his honest opinions and his honest thoughts, and he's being very concrete in his detailing, right? But he's being very sincere, and that always sort of sells me a little bit on what they're building. He seems like the guy that is thoroughly enjoying his time working on this game and implementing these systems and seeing how they evolve with our feedback and as they develop, and that really sold me a little bit on the guild store system. Again, I'm not totally convinced, but that's one of the things that led me to go, you know what, maybe I trust them a little bit more than I previously did with this stuff. But you know what, guys, that's going to do it for me, as I said earlier. Thanks for watching, and make sure to hit that thumbs up, that subscribe button, and make sure to stick to Noble Pulse Gaming for all of the latest ESO news and discussion. Before I go, I also want to give props to the ShoddyCast guys for being such a pillar for the ESO community, and admittedly, they're quite the inspiration for my own work. I definitely look up to those guys, so massive thanks to them for really sticking it with ESO and really staying focused and giving everybody this great information and commentary and discussion and all of that stuff. And you know what, I would be really ecstatic to maybe one day in the future collaborate with those guys. Like I said, huge inspiration, so massive props to those guys. And also props to Nick Konkle for again being sincere with this interview. But you know what, guys, that's gonna do it for me. I'll rabble on for ages about how awesome the ShoddyCast guys are, or how Nick Konkle is. So that's gonna do it. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you on the next one.